From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
So today we have the great pleasure of introducing David Warren Steele, who actually I think I met David Warren actually many, 1981, golly, ancient history. But Dr. Steele is an associate professor of music and Southern culture at the University of Mississippi in Oxford. And if any of you have not been to Oxford and seen the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, it's a wonderful place. They have a blues archive, and they have fried pickles on the right next to Square Books, which is one of the best bookstores in the country. So anyway. That's what I remember anyway. Dr. Steele is a graduate of Harvard College and the University of Michigan, where actually he knew Nancy Gross. They were colleagues at the university there in ethnomusicology. And he's edited the collected works of early American composers Stephen Jenks and Daniel Belknap. And since 1972, he's also been an enthusiastic singer and scholar of Sacred Harp music. He was the editor of the Sacred Harp 1991 edition and provided liner notes for several recordings of Sacred Harp music. He's taught at Camp Fasola, a residential singing school. Many of you might be familiar with that. And he also appears in the documentary film Awake My Soul. But just recently, he has a new book, which he authored with Dick Hewlin, who's here in the audience with us. And it's called The Makers of the Sacred Harp. And it's newly published by the University of Illinois Press. And I must say that the University of Illinois Press is very much noted for its traditional music series of books. Our board member emeritus, Dr. Judy McCullough, who is a recent Heritage Award winner from the NEA, really shepherded this series of musical books through the press. And so this is one of the latest and greatest books in that series. So please, if you would, welcome David Warren Steele.
Well, I'd like to thank Peggy and Nancy, and it's a privilege to be at the Folklife Center, and just with such a large audience here, and it's a pleasure to greet you all. This is the cover of the book, The Makers of the Sacred Harp, and we'll look at that cover in more detail later. And this is a study of, to some extent, of folklore, because sacred harp singing is definitely informed by folklore and folk culture, but it's also history and biography. For those who would like an introduction, I'll introduce sacred harp singing and then talk about 3 counties in West Georgia and try to place the setting as and then 3 composers who lived at least for a while in that area. And also my work is mainly on the music and the composers. Dick Hewlin, who is here, has worked on the poets and hymn writers of the Sacred Harp, and contributed some quite interesting new material in that field as well. Sacred Harp singing is a community and musical social event emphasizing participation and not performance, where people sing songs from a tune book called the Sacred Harp, printed in music notation using 4 shaped notes. It is the preeminent living reflection of the music of early American psalmody. It is not identical to the congregational singing of 18th century New England, but it preserves several fundamental characteristics of that era, including a complex of musical skills learned in singing schools and an eclectic repertory of religious part songs by European and American composers printed in an oblong book. Since the 19th century, Sacred Harp singings have employed a distinctive hollow square seating arrangement and a rotation of leaders. They begin each song with sol-fa syllables, followed by one or more verses of sung text. Despite its reliance on printed materials, Sacred Harp singing is a form of traditional music that stands on the persistent collaboration of generations of composers, songbook compilers, editors, revisers, singing teachers, song leaders, and singers of all ages who identify with its sincerity, enthusiasm, devotional strength, and deep historical roots. For more than 150 years, the Sacred Harp has represented a tradition of community-based music making. It relies on musical participation, rotation of song leaders, and contributions of food for a communal meal. It avoids contentious discussion of politics and denominational religion. The Sacred Harp tradition is often cited as an embodiment of American democracy, but its history reflects conflicts that formed the nation as well. Originating in religious pluralism and cultural self-improvement, it survived wars, political and religious struggles, commercial competition, litigation, and personal slights. In the years 1801 to 1861, at least 35 residents of the southern U.S. compiled and published sacred tune books in this notation. Sacred Harp in 1844 was modeled after existing tune books and competed in a similar cultural and educational and religious space. Like most other Southern tune books, it is an eclectic collection containing examples of several different forms, genres, and styles. Like many other compilers, the 43-year-old Benjamin Franklin White and his 23-year-old collaborator, Elisha James King, played a role more like that of anthologists than original artists. Both men composed and arranged music, but their primary job was to select tunes from earlier publications, from manuscripts, from their own stock of compositions, and from oral tradition. When B.F. White was born in 1800 in South Carolina, the Georgia land that would produce the Sacred Harp was the home of the Muskogee or Creek Confederation. This is the brown area on the left of the map between the Chattahoochee and Flint rivers. The pink area above that was still Cherokee territory, and this is an 1822 map. Despite several treaties giving up land to white settlement, the Creek still held this large and fertile land. In 1823, George M. Troup was elected governor of Georgia and immediately began efforts to acquire the remaining Creek lands in Georgia. He possessed an important advantage. William McIntosh, leader of the Lower Creek Council, was his first cousin. In February 1825, McIntosh signed the Treaty of Indian Springs, ceding all remaining Creek lands in Georgia. And after protests from other Creek leaders and the assassination of McIntosh in 1825, the federal government voided the treaty and negotiated a new arrangement with a larger and more representative Creek council. This new treaty called for the cession of most but not all the area covered by the earlier treaty, and did not require the Creek to move west of the Mississippi River yet. Not to be deterred, Governor Troup forcibly removed the Creek from all their remaining Georgia lands, even those excluded by the Second Treaty, which, back please, the previous, and had the entire land surveyed for a lottery, including those two narrow strips up in the northwest part of the cession to the right, to the left there. The new treaty called, this tract included all the lands between the Flint and Chattahoochee River, back please, and the lands west of the Chattahoochee. The 1826 Creek Cession was only one in a westward march of Indian cessions that you can see clearly on this map, and which continued on into Alabama and the other states in the 1830s. As the state took control of this cession, the land was divided into 5 districts. And these were in turn organized as Carroll, Coweta, Lee, Muskogee, and Troup counties. Those are very large for counties in Georgia, and they were soon subdivided. Georgia has more counties than every other state except Texas. So, and it's a medium-sized state, so they're very small counties in Georgia. The allotment of land to individuals, like that in all the new Georgia lands, was according to a lottery system. All white male U.S. citizens over 18 years of age who had lived in Georgia for at least 3 years, as well as widows and orphans, were eligible to draw for a 202.5 acre lot. Fortunate drawers is what they were called. They could claim their land on payment of an $18 fee to cover the expenses of the lottery. According to family tradition, John and Elizabeth King, parents of Sacred Harp co-compiler E.J. King, were among the fortunate drawers in the 1827 lottery and subsequently claimed land near Upatoy Creek in what would become Talbot County. And that's over in the north part of the Muskogee area there. The 1827 lottery resulted in the rapid development of the region by white settlers and black slaves, and the further subdivision into smaller counties. The census shows that as early as 1840, 4 of the 7 most populous counties in Georgia were in this new section, including Troup, there on the west border, Talbot, Meriwether, and Harris. Talbot County, home to E.J. King and many other composers, was the 4th largest county by population only 13 years after its settlement. Slightly more than 43% of its residents were enslaved blacks. Harris County, on the western border, home of Sacred Harp compiler Benjamin Franklin White, was the 6th largest, with an even greater proportion of slaves. The Sacred Harp arose during the Jacksonian era, when the United States made impressive strides towards democracy and universal white male suffrage. The enforced removal of the southeastern Indians in the Trail of Tears removed the threat of violence to the settlers. The new territories filled rapidly with settlers from eastern Georgia, from the Carolinas and Virginia. The cotton economy flourished in the Chattahoochee and Flint valleys, where large plantations produced tons of cotton to feed the mills of the northern states and Great Britain, while rendering the gradual elimination of slavery a political impossibility. The antebellum boom encouraged the growth of industry, construction of canals and railroads, the founding of schools and colleges, including the Hamilton Female Academy in Harris County in 1853, and a big increase in printing and publishing, such as the Sacred Harp itself in 1844, and the Hamilton newspaper called The Organ in 1852, and it was co-edited by B.F. White. The economic prosperity that made the Sacred Harp possible was based on the rich lands of the Native Americans and the arduous labor of enslaved blacks, despite the fact that fewer than 5% of the free Southerners owned any slaves at all. The paradox perceived by James Madison of Virginia remained unsolved in our country. Next to the case of the black race within our bosom, that of the red on our borders is the problem most baffling to the policy of our country. The Chattahoochee Valley was the home of the Sacred Harp, but it was only a transition stopping point for many settlers who tarried there before the Civil War and later moved on to cheaper, more fertile land. So this is why the geography seems important in this moment in time for producing this book. The settlers all came from the east, from eastern Georgia, because the lottery was limited to Georgia residents, from the Carolinas, and from Virginia. Almost all the composers who lived in this area died west of their birthplace. So it was part of the western migration. They died in West Georgia, Alabama, or Texas. The Creek Indians were evicted less than 20 years before the publication of the Sacred Harp. Settlers were aware of the role of music in Indian life. An 1855 lecture reprinted in the Organ, Upson County schoolmaster G.H. Purdue praised the healing power of music by invoking the Indians expelled only a quarter century before. He said, "Music has a powerful effect on our feelings in this world of care and trouble. It would be extremely difficult to get along without this soul-enlivening gift of God. It will be recollected that the aborigines of this country have so great a confidence in the charms of music that it was resorted to in cases of extreme sickness, and indeed it often had the desired effect." Finally, the settlers were also aware of the musical talents of their human property. Thomas Wiggins, born blind and in slavery on a Harris County plantation in 1849, was sold as an infant to Columbus lawyer James N. Bethune, and he became a musical prodigy after his debut in 1857 in Columbus, Georgia, as Blind Tom, the concert pianist. In the 20th century, the Chattahoochee Valley, home of the Sacred Harp, has been recognized by folklorists George Mitchell, David Evans, and Fred Fussell as an important source of African American traditional music, including spiritual songs, fife and drum bands, gospel music, and blues. But here are the faces of the makers of the Sacred Harp. John Palmer Reese, or Squire Reese, farmer, his twin brother, preacher, Henry Smith Reese, and Oliver Bradfield and his family. These portraits have appeared in several histories, beginning with George Pullen Jackson's White Spirituals in the Southern Uplands in 1933, and they represent their subjects in old age as Sacred Harp patriarchs, although they began their musical activities as young men. Like many of other composers, they lived in western Georgia, mostly in 3 counties: Talbot, home of E.J. King; Harris, home of B.F. White; and Carroll County to the north, which is a region where the Sacred Harp still flourishes today. And we'll examine the lives of 3 composers born in the 19th century who contributed to the sound and tradition of Sacred Harp singing as we know it today. Talbot County was long neglected by observers, and this was the home of at least 13 Sacred Harp composers, more than any county. Many cases we didn't know they lived there, and some cases we didn't even know their names. But this was truly the cradle of the Sacred Harp. Among its residents were E.J. King, his brother Elias Lafayette King, Spencer Reed Pennick, Leonard P. Breedlove, John Massingale, Edwin Theophilus Pound, James Lafayette Pickard, John Smith Searcy, the two Reese brothers that you've seen, and the three Lancaster sisters, Anne, Sarah, and Priscilla. Surprisingly, these three sisters were direct descendants of European musicians and composers that flourished in the 16th century. Ambrose de Amaliach, known as Lupo, was a Jewish string player from Milan, possibly a Sephardic refugee from Spain or Portugal, who was one of 6 musicians recruited in Venice in 1540 by agents of Henry VIII. He served the English court as a string player until his death in 1591, played at the funeral of Henry VIII and the coronations of Edward VI and Elizabeth I. His sons and grandsons were likewise court musicians and composers. They performed at Queen Elizabeth's funeral in 1603. Compositions of several of the Lupos survive. Philip Lupo was a grandson of Ambrose Lupo, not a professional musician, who journeyed to Virginia in the early days of its settlement and returned in 1640 to take up land in Isle of Wight County, now part of the Norfolk area, where he became the father of the Lupo family that produced the Lancaster sisters of Georgia. Anna Lupo, born in 1781, was a descendant of Philip Lupo. She married James Lancaster in 1809 in North Carolina. Their oldest son was named James Lupo Lancaster, born in 1810. After the mother was widowed, Anna was widowed, she and her 7 children, and pregnant with an 8th, moved to Georgia. By this time, James Lupo Lancaster had married his cousin Charity Lancaster in 1827, and they had 3 small children with them. 6 additional children were born in Talbot County, Georgia, where they grew up in a large extended family whose neighbors included the Kings, the Reeses, the Pickards, the Breedloves, all Sacred Harp pioneers, and where their lives surely included music making. Among James and Charity's children were the 3 musical sisters, Anne, Sarah, or Sally, and Priscilla, or Sid. By the mid-1850s, all 3 were composing music, and Sarah was developing a lifelong interest in the art. An 1854 letter from Sarah to Anne shows that she was attending the Hamilton Female Seminary in Hamilton, Harris County, and was boarding with B.F. White and his family. She may have attended one of his singing schools, but she was concentrating on musical instruction at the school, including private piano lessons. The letter reveals a young woman with an intense interest and almost an obsession with music. And by 1859, she had formed the habit of including one or more original compositions in each letter to family members or close friends. Another close friend of the Lancaster sisters was Nancy Bradfield, who lived in Coweta County with her family, who included her brother that you see right there, Oliver Bradfield, composer. In an 1860 letter, Nancy Bradfield encourages Sarah Lancaster to continue sending pieces of music. I don't care how many tunes you send me, if it is 100. Another letter to Sarah from a brother-in-law in the Confederate Army shows that she had sent him a piece as well. And he writes from Virginia, "I am 1,000 times obliged to you for the song you sent me. I think I can learn it tolerable easy. Oh, I haven't language to express how proud I am of it." In 1866, Sarah Lancaster married George Washington, or Wash, Hagler. 10 years later, the couple with their 5 children moved to Freestone County, Texas, where Sarah continued to send music with her letters and to inquire about the singings back home in Georgia. In 1877, she wrote to her sister Anne, "I have tunes running in my mind all the time, day and night. Tell me what you think of that." Members of the Lupo family served 6 English monarchs from 1540 to 1650, separated by 2 centuries from the musical activities of their Georgia descendants. Present-day descendants of James Lupo Lancaster include piano teachers, amateur musicians. They still regard themselves as a musical family. I have not found a portrait of Sarah Lancaster, but her tombstone in Texas has been located. And it's time for us to hear one of her compositions. She was a pioneer in a new style of tune that is prominent in the Sacred Harp today. These are fuguing tunes based on the 18th century fuguing tune, but they seem to have almost always ring changes on the same tonic chord, in this case a major chord. And she also helped to revive the alto part, which had passed out of use in some of the earlier Southern tune books, and had been omitted by White and King and many other composers. We can listen to Sardis as sung at a convention in 1999. Another one of her tunes was called The Last Words of Copernicus, and is a similar enthusiastic fuguing tune. And I'd say if you're familiar with this style, you wouldn't mistake it for William Billings, even though the format of the tune is similar. Matthew Mark Wynn of Carroll County, Georgia, was a close contemporary. Born in eastern Georgia in 1835. You see that Sarah was born in 1834. Wynn grew up in Carroll County, showed intellectual ability at an early age. At 19, he was elected the first secretary of the Chattahoochee Musical Convention. Now that was a singing convention founded in 1852 that still goes on today. He drafted that body's constitution following the 1866 session and was a member of the Villa Rica Masonic Lodge. In 1859, he married Sarah Carolyn Garrison, and in 1867 moved to Texas, where he farmed, taught school, but remained active and highly mobile as a singing teacher. He was the secretary of the East Texas Singing Convention in 1869 and appears with his growing family in the 1870 census for Hunt County, the 1880 census for Hopkins County, and 1878 he was in Leesburg, Camp County, teaching in the Temple Star, which is a 7-shape singing book by Aldine S. Kiefer from the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. In 1884, he was teaching school in Fannin County, only to move to West Texas, to Brownwood, Brown County, where he edited a newspaper for the Populist Party from 1892 to 97. We haven't found where or when he died, but a photograph of him in middle age bears the imprint of a studio in Wolf City, Texas. The songs of Mark Wynn were first published in the 1870 edition of the Sacred Harp after his move to Texas. And they include Save, Lord, or We Perish. And that's a fuguing tune similar to Sarah Lancaster's in the way that it has a single chord, but since it's in a minor key, you have fewer full triads, a lot more open fifths, and it has a droning effect that's quite hypnotic and eerie. Now, this is clearly a strong influence on the style of 20th century composers in the Sacred Harp, many of whom write fuguing tunes in a similar style, including Tom Denson, Seaborn Denson, Marcus Kegel, and others, Tom and Bud McGraw, and others. So the third composer I want to feature is Sidney Seward Burdette. She was born in Georgia in 1853, the daughter of William Howard Burdette and Julia Ann Prather. She was educated in a female academy in Troup County, Georgia, and became a school teacher. She accompanied her family to Alabama, eastern Alabama, the gold fields, and Arbucoochee, where she married Seaborn M. Denson in 1874. Her younger sister, Amanda Burdette, married Seaborn Denson's younger brother, Thomas Jackson Denson, a few years later. And so their children were double first cousins. And at the 1880 session of the Chattahoochee Musical Convention, Sidney Denson was the only female song leader, the first ever in that convention's history. This event inspires the cover art for the new book, The Makers of the Sacred Harp. And the cover art is by Beth Ann Hill of Birmingham, Alabama. As J.A. Robertson reported in the Carroll County Times, one remarkable thing calculated to excite the curious. was the rendition of a lesson on Sunday at 11 o'clock, conducted by a Mrs. Denson of Alabama. When it was announced by the chair that a lady would conduct a lesson, the house was instantly filled to overflowing. People mounted the benches with eager eyes and itching ears, so as to be able to see and learn all that passed. Mrs. Denson's lesson was conducted with skill and good taste, and void of that embarrassment peculiar to women. Your reporter ventures the opinion that it was the best lesson of the convention. And so you see her there, and you see gawkers, both inside and outside, looking in the window. And you'll also notice the provision of water. All the water, the spring in the on the left in the background with the courting couple by the spring. And this is how Sacred Harp singers have met their spouses over the years. And you'll also see the people bringing up supplies of water, because an earlier Chattahoochee convention had exhausted the well 3 times during the course of the convention. According to family members, it was Sidney Denson who selected a scriptural quotation printed below the title of each piece in the Sacred Harp, and those are retained today. Although she sang treble, she and her sister Amanda aided her husband in collecting and composing alto parts for that revision. And altos, yes, alto power. She joined the Church of God and gave lectures and taught Bible classes. And her song in the Sacred Harp, "The Marriage in the Skies," was first published in 1909. It was composed in a contemporary gospel style favored by that denomination. Sidney Denson died in 1928. In that same year, 3 of her sons, Whit, Bob, and Evan Denson, joined up with James Cadmus Brown to form the Denson Quartet. Now, J.C. Brown was a furniture dealer in Birmingham and Gadsden, and many of you are aware how in the early days of the recording industry, recording traditional music, furniture dealers who sold Victrolas to the population knew what the people wanted to hear, and often knew local artists who might be recorded by major record labels and commercial records. And so they served as talent scouts. It's possible that J.C. Brown was the one who introduced the Denson brothers to the Columbia Record Company. But the Denson Quartet in October recorded several sides for Columbia in Atlanta. Among their recordings is a rendition of Sarah Lancaster's first published composition, "I'm on My Journey Home." And you can see there the typical notation. There's a 4-part tune above, and then "I'm on My Journey Home." This one is printed in only 3 parts, with the tenor in the middle, and you see the 4-shaped notes, and it's just a single verse with what's called a chorus by Miss S. Lancaster. That's in the 1859 Sacred Harp. Here the singers included male alto Whit Denson, and they're clearly well trained in the newer gospel music style. But I think that the style also of these commercial recordings of Sacred Harp is based on family singing, singing at home, singing while working, and just singing in small groups whenever you meet another person who is a singer, with or without a book. And these singers are clearly informed by generations of traditional singing, and they're confident in every nuance and unanimous in every expressive gesture. The result is one of the most compelling recordings ever made of Sacred Harp music. even though, as I say, it's quite different from the full class sound that was really first recorded by Alan Lomax and George Pullen Jackson, I think in 1942, and released by the Library of Congress. So here is I'm on My Journey Home by Sarah Lancaster, sung by the Denson Quartet. You can follow the music there. Okay, now you notice that there was only one verse in the book that you saw, and here they were singing two verses, added verses from another hymn, presumably to fill up the time allotted on one side of a 10-inch 78 RPM record. This is a commercial recording. You can also hear the style. For one thing, that a man is singing the treble part an octave lower, which you hear at singings, but in the quartet style, that means that the alto, which is sung at its proper pitch, is the highest part. So it's kind of like the high tenor in a gospel quartet or a barbershop quartet, for that matter, and often has less melodic interest, but it kind of drones on above the tenor and treble, which are crossing over each other constantly. And the Denson brothers were fully trained in gospel quartet performance, and they and their cousins actually made a living through publishing gospel songbooks, selling them out of the trunks of their car, and and performing at churches for free will offerings. And many times they didn't even have a chance to go to Sacred Harp singings. They loved Sacred Harp singing, but there was no money to be made in it. That they would feel forced in the hard times to perform someplace where they could hope to get some money for singing. Now, these records and ones like them, I heard in high school in Schenectady, New York, and felt compelled to learn more about them. But in 1972, finally found in Cambridge, Massachusetts, singers who gathered together purposely every other week to sing out of the Sacred Harp. And that same summer, again, I had to see it. I had to go where it was, and took a trip to eastern Alabama, just west of the border of that map we were seeing there in 1972. And it was a very small singing. The state convention was going on that weekend. I didn't know about that. But somehow I found out about this singing in East Alabama. And it was, for a young man there, we were thinking of Easy Rider and a little afraid. But when we got there first at this little church with a spring, and then a man pulled up in a pickup truck and reached behind the seat of his pickup truck. But he came up with a Sacred Harp songbook and welcomed us, and I've felt very welcome ever since, and wanted to learn more about it. And so I want to say that this book, which you see the cover here, will be out within the next month and is being published by the University of Illinois Press, as Peggy told you. And if you're interested in this topic, I hope you'll read it. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.